I'd like to call to order the City of Belvedere Finance Committee meeting of Thursday, April 16th. Robert, can we have a roll call? Yes.
Casco,
Yes.
John Wilton is absent. David Walker,
Present.
Patrick Fader.
Yeah.
Will Lyon.
Present.
Sorry. And Councilmember Mark.
Here, thank you.
And we also have our city manager, Robert Zadnick, and myself, Helga Cotter, Director of Administrative Services.
Okay, can we first have an open forum? There are no members in the audience. Robert, is there anyone online?
Online.
Okay, so next item will be to approve the minutes of our last meeting on January 22nd. Are there any comments or changes? And if not, can I have a motion to approve?
So move.
Second?
Second.
Okay, roll call.
Chair McCaskill,
Yes.
David Walker, Patrick Fader,
Yes.
and that passes unanimously. He doesn't get to vote, so yes.
Okay, third agenda item, discussion and possible action regarding the semi-annual review of the city's investments. Helga?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair McCaskill and committee. In February of 24, the council approved a change to the city's investments, which involved transferring most of the city's fund balance from the local agency investment fund, or LAIF, to CalTrust. As part of the update, investment policy staff will provide investment information to the committee on a semi-annual basis. The CalTrust funds earned over $460,000 in interest last fiscal year and have generated $350,000 through the first 3 quarters of this fiscal year. In July of 2024, with the approval of the Finance Committee Chair, the remaining $150,000 in LAIF was transferred to CalTrust short-term fund to take advantage of a slightly higher interest rate, but was moved to the liquidity fund in January of 2025 to take advantage of an even slightly higher yield and a more stable net asset value. Only a small balance remains in LAIF at this time. Mayor Wilkinson, committee member Will Lyon, and I review the investments at the end of each quarter and recommend any changes to Chair McCaskill for his approval per the investment policy. As of the quarter ending March 31st, 2026, we recommend maintaining the current CalTrust allocation. The city fund balance is invested in the liquidity fund, which continues to provide the highest return and maintains a stable net asset value in these uncertain times. And with that, staff are available for questions.
Okay, questions or comments? Will, you're our expert on this. I assume you've weighed in on this, and Helga tells me the recommendation is that we just keep it where it is. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. I think the only thing that I would add is some of the other funds, both at CalTrust and at LAIF, have moved slightly above the liquidity fund yield. But what's unique about the liquidity fund is it's got that stable net asset value like a money market fund. So, if interest rates pop up, we wouldn't have any principal risk. I think what we've already kicked off is gathering additional information, both from LAIF as well as from CalTrust on the CalTrust funds that we don't own, just to try to level set, across our fund choices, from a risk perspective. I think we've learned that LAIF does in fact have a stable principal value, which I think is equivalent to a stable net asset value. So I think the point to the committee is we're going back and getting more information, and I think our approach to get much deeper information sort of on an annual basis makes good sense. And then we'll come back to this group with a recommendation because it may make sense to split out some assets to try to capture a little bit higher yield if the risks are the same, both in terms of credit quality of the underlying bonds as well as the stability of the principal. So expect more from us after doing this deeper dive.
Okay. Other questions or comments from the committee? And Robert, still no one on the public. All right. So presumably the motion that needs to be made is one that no change to our current investment allocation. Is that correct, Helga?
Yes, that's
Okay.
correct.
Can I have a motion and a second?
I'll make a motion to approve if I can vote.
I don't know. You can't vote, so I'm not sure you can make a motion.
It's true.
I don't think so.
All right. So
move.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay. Roll call.
McCaskill,
Yes.
David Walker,
Aye.
and Patrick Fader.
Yes.
That passes unanimously.
Okay, next item on the agenda is the review regarding the fiscal year 26-27 preliminary operating and capital budget review. Helga?
So thank you, Chair McCaskill and committee. Before you today is a preliminary operating capital budget for fiscal year 26-27. To begin with some revenue highlights, the general fund revenues are projected to increase by 10.2% or approximately 979,000. Property tax revenue remained the main driver with overall growth of 5.62% over the current year budget, or about 439,000 based on the most recent county estimates. Other property tax revenues are expected to remain flat, while the fire tax revenue is projected to increase by approximately 3% pending final state data, which comes out around May 1st. Development-related fee revenues have increased due to the new user fee schedule that went into effect July 1st, 2025, and continued development activity, particularly large-scale projects, and increased encroachment and road closures. Despite a slight decline in permit volume, fees are projected to recover approximately 89% of the city's cost of service. The City Council also approved a CPI-based adjustment for the user fee schedule, which will be effective July 1st, 2026. Fee performance in the first year has largely met the 92% cost recovery target. Therefore, no additional incremental revenue is assumed in the outer years. Consistent with best practice, no revenue increases were assumed in the first year of implementation, and staff will continue to monitor cost recovery over time or trends over time as they may fluctuate with broader economic conditions. One-time increase in building permit plan review and road impact fee revenue is anticipated in fiscal year 27-28 from the Mallard Point project based on the current timeline. Timing remains uncertain, and staff will refine revenue projections as the project advances. No grant funding is included in the proposed budget at this time, though staff will continue to pursue opportunities through partner agencies. Overall revenue projections remain strong, but are intentionally conservative to support long-term fiscal stability amid the economic uncertainty. And now on the expenditure side, from the general fund, fiscal year 25-26 was the last year of a 3-year contract with the city's represented and non-represented groups. The city is currently engaged in labor negotiations and anticipates reaching an agreement in the coming weeks. The fiscal year 26-27 budget incorporates the results of a compensation study and a 2.5% cost of living adjustment. A 3% salary increase has been assumed across the outer years. The fiscal year 26-27 budget includes $235,000 for a temporary police officer position over a 3-year period to support operations during the police department evaluation. The budget includes $150,000 for implementing the housing element goals, programs, and policies, along with funding for general legal costs and ongoing litigation. It also allocates $50,000 for the city's 2030 climate action plan. Expenditures related to the Mallard Point project include $150,000 for a special project manager, $10,000 for relocation specialists, and $45,000 for city engineering services. These costs will be reimbursed in accordance with the agreement with the developer. Tiburon Fire is estimating a 7.5% increase in our contract costs again this coming fiscal year due to increase in district expenditures related to Station 10. From the Capital Equipment Fund, the budget includes $70,000 to replace an aging Public Works utility truck, $70,000 for a police handheld radar unit, and $13,500 for replacement of several staff computers, a server, and backup power systems. From the Capital Improvement Fund, the budget includes the Beach Road Stabilization Project scheduled from June through October of 26, with a total cost of $4.97 million. Of this, $4.68 million will be funded from the Critical Infrastructure Reserve, with $345,000 from other sources to close the gap. An estimated $2.48 million will roll over from fiscal year 25-26, and the construction contract was approved by council on April 13th. The 5-year CIP includes ongoing annual funding of $80,000 for lane improvements and $15,000 for vegetation management and fire fuel reductions. Key projects next year include Harry B. Allen stair repairs, community park restroom renovations, redrilling of the community park well, and police department improvements. The budget also includes $60,000 to complete the infrastructure assessments, which will inform the fiscal year 27-28 capital budget. Several projects are expected to be partially funded through partner agencies and private donations. And this brings us to another large part of the city's expenditures are staffing costs. Personnel costs are projected to increase in fiscal year 26-27 over estimated actuals, primarily due to staffing additions and compensation adjustments. Regular salaries are increasing by 21%, approximately $535,000, driven by higher staffing levels with 21 staff headcount in the proposed budget versus 18.4 actual headcount in fiscal year 25-26, which is an increase of about 14% over estimated actuals. Implementation of the compensation study of 4% increase or $124,000 and a 2.5% COLA or about $75,000. Lower fiscal year 25-26 staffing and expenditures reflect vacancies in police, administration, and public works during the current fiscal year. These positions have all been filled with administration position new hire starting April 28th. Health insurance costs are projected to rise by 22%, reflecting a 9% increase in premiums, as well as the addition of family rate coverage for the new police position. The city's unfunded accrued liability contribution is increasing by 45%, approximately $104,000 over the fiscal year 26 actuals, consistent with fluctuations driven by CalPERS investment performance, actuary assumptions, and retiree experience. Other personnel costs are also increasing, primarily due to the addition of 1.5 positions in the police department, impacting costs such as holiday pay, shift differential, and education incentive. And this next slide highlights the city's required pensions related payments to CalPERS, including contributions toward the unfunded accrued liability and payments associated with the pension obligation leaseback debt. The fiscal year 26-27 UAL payment is based on the most recent CalPERS actuary valuation as of June 30th, 2024, which reflected an investment return of 9.3%. However, prior years continue to impact current and future contribution requirements, including a negative 6.1% return for the period ending June 30th, 22, and a 5.8% return for the period ending June 30th, 2023, both of which fell below the CalPERS assumed rate of 6.8%, and the impacts of the June 24 investment return impacts are reflected in the slight decrease in the UAL in year 4 and 5. Again, UAL costs may fluctuate annually based on investment performance, changes in actuary assumptions, and retiree experience. The pension-related debt obligation will have a final payment of $123,000 in fiscal year 31-32. We are also planning a review of the city's pension funding strategy for this coming December, including whether some Section 115 assets should be transferred to CalPERS. This item will be discussed later on the agenda. This next slide shows the anticipated transfers from the general fund that are part of this budget. The fire is $1.42 million, pension 115 trust, $300,000, pension-related debt, $237,000. The budget includes a $100,000 transfer to the insurance and legal reserve fund to cover ongoing uninsured legal expense, with the reduction in the transfer amount reflecting an anticipated decrease in legal costs and bringing the fund to its minimal required balance. The capital improvement fund of $184,000 and the $705 transfer to the critical infrastructure reserve was budgeted in 25-26 to support the Beach Road stabilization project. The fund will also be renamed the Long-Term Capital Planning Fund and receive $1.1 million to support future capital needs identified through upcoming infrastructure assessments. And finally, the Equipment Replacement Fund transfer of $89,500. Brings us to a summary of the proposed budget. The budget anticipates total operating revenues of $11.86 million and total operating expenditures of $11.16 million, resulting in an operating surplus of just over $700,000. Capital revenues are estimated at $545,000, while capital expenditures are projected to be $3.31 million, leading to a capital fund deficit of $2.77 million. Primarily due to the $2.23 million in expenditure for the Beach Road stabilization project next year. In summary, revenues are projected at $12.41 million and expenditures at $14.48 million, resulting in a $2.07 million deficit. This is primarily due to the one-time costs for the Beach Road stabilization project and largely funded by the critical infrastructure reserve. Following this one-time expense, the budget is expected to return to more typical operating levels. This slide shows projected fund balances as of June 30th, 2027. General fund begins fiscal year 2026 begins fiscal year 27 at $7.21 million above the reserve target, and after planned transfers for fire capital pensions is projected to end the year at $5.63 million. The critical infrastructure reserve reflects a $2.49 million transfer out and a $705 transfer in, resulting in a remaining balance of $1.1 million. As mentioned previously, this fund will be renamed the Long-Term Capital Planning Fund to support future capital needs identified through the infrastructure assessments. The budget, as submitted, anticipates returning to a more normal state following the city's allowing the city to replenish the newly renamed Long-Term Capital Planning Fund to over $1.53 million by the end of the forecast period. And this brings us to the general fund reserve. The reserve policy is to maintain a reserve equal to 50% of the projected general fund expense plus fire transfer plus pension debt service. This budget incorporates the policy with the reserve goal at 50% of the fiscal year 27-28 projected general fund expense plus fire transfer plus debt service, which is 5.27 million. The projected general fund balance at the end of next fiscal year is 5.63 million. The projected general fund balance is over the policy goal by 354,000 or 53%. And this slide shows the history of the general fund's actual ending fund balance, the fiscal year 25-26 estimated general fund balance of 7.21 million, and shows the 5-year projections. The green line reflects the council's reserve policy goal. And as you can see, the budget reflects that it does meet the reserve policy goal for the next 5 years. And in conclusion, a few highlights of the budget are the general fund reserve is met over the 5-year forecast period. We continue with annual contributions to our 115 pension trust, contributions to the critical infrastructure reserve to fund the Beach Road stabilization construction project, and plans to replenish the fund in future years. The budget reflects a fiscally conservative approach that prioritizes maintaining staffing levels and support the city's operational needs. And so what are our next steps? Today, we're looking for your input, which we'll incorporate as we continue to refine the budget. We'll then bring the draft to the City Council on May 11th for review and feedback, and return on June 8th for adoption following the public hearing. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions.
David, since you had sent us a list of questions, you want to start going through your questions? Then we'll get to.
Sure. If I can step back just quickly, there was one comment on the investment memo I wanted to make. And that was on page 2, where it says under restricted investments in the middle of the first paragraph, these funds are not available for the city's ongoing operating costs and are restricted for pension costs. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I might write that sentence as these funds are restricted for pension costs. And the reason I would say that is because they can be used for operating costs in the sense of covering the current year's pension payments. And if you think about it, we pay something around $750,000 a year in pension costs, 700,000, something like that. And so if you had $3 million in this 115 fund, or $3.5 million or something, you could actually pay your pension operating costs for 4 or 5 years out of that fund. And that's sort of a secondary benefit, because we set that fund up to more fully fund accrued liability rather than to pushing current balance sheet liabilities into a future source. But it also is that secondary benefit is quite tremendous and powerful. It's unlikely we would need to call on that, but you just mentioned in the budget review, we have this sort of secure balance. This other 115 fund has a residual secondary benefit of that same. And so I think just for the record, if we think of it as restricted for pension costs, that's probably appropriate.
Okay, we can make that change. Sally?
Where are you looking for? I'm not seeing it.
Page 2 of the investment memo.
Paragraph under restricted investments.
It's really the operational aspect of
Right.
It's restricted to pension costs.
Oh, sure.
I think that gets lost. And
Yep.
again, it's not our primary purpose, but it's a powerful reserve.
Okay. Next.
Well, I sent an email to you as the chair and,
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Robert and Helga. I don't know if Helga wants to just dive into that.
Sure. So I can go through your questions. Your
You'll need to
first, what,
read the question first, Helga, since the
oh,
full committee doesn't have that email.
the first question was around planning and building and why there are kind of fluctuations in the outer years of the planning and building expenditures. Correct, David?
Yeah, it recognizes that we've got a significant increase associated with Mallard Point. Goes up for a few years, then it comes down. But is questioning when it comes back down, does that fully eliminate the Mallard Point costs by the final year in the 5-year budget? It asks about how these Mallard Point costs, the outside consultants are pretty obvious, but the planning and building personnel and benefit costs, how those go up and how they come back down. And again, are they fully down by year 5? And then I don't know if I noted in that email, but if you take the 25-26 expected actual for planning and building and compare that to the 5th year of the budget, it's about a 59% increase, or about 10% a year over that 5-year period. So that's the sort of overall context. We recognize the Mallard Point aspect. I'm wondering about how that relates to the actual staffing, personnel, and benefit costs. And are those fully out by the final year? And if they are, we're still rolling on about a 10% annualized increase in that department.
So we're not anticipating any additional staff for related to the Mallard, in addition to the special consultants that we're hiring. So our staffing positions, we're not planning to increase those related to the project. The part of the increase in those outer years is planning for the 2030 general plan update. I spread 660,000 over a 3-year period in those outer years, and then I backed it out. So that's what accounts for those fluctuations in those years. I didn't, in the upcoming budget, the proposed budget, I budgeted the 150 for the Mallard Project Special Coordinator. And so in speaking with our Director of Planning and Building, we do anticipate that that person will be on board for the project, but and depending on what applications are submitted next, it will determine what the consultants needs in what they need to oversee in the future. So we'll have a better idea of what that consultant's activity will be in the outer years. But the cost of the 150 is still within the budget over the 5 years. Hopefully that answers your question.
You're saying the 150 is annual for 5 years?
Yes,
So you have 750,000 in the 5-year forecast for the.
yes. And
So
you know, but
that
that-
remains in that 5th year. I didn't see that, but I guess it's true.
it does. I didn't back that out. The only thing I backed out was the cost for the general plan update. So, because that needs to be completed by 2030.
And that's 660,000?
Yes, it's spread over 3 years.
And is that an outside or is that personnel benefits?
It'd be outside, but that's a kind of plug number for now, because the scope and defining how that update's going to happen is still being worked out.
So the So none of the 660 is in the fifth year of the budget?
Correct.
So if you backed out 150,000 in the fifth year for the Mallard Point coordinator, that might be a number that would be somewhat comparable to the actual 25, 26 estimated. I'm trying to just look for, I wasn't cognizant of this $600,000 one, which we probably want to talk about a little bit. It's not a small number. But I was looking at, okay, we've got this Mallard Point bump and trying to just get a trend from 25, 26 actual, which presumably is a kind of a regular number pre that bump. And it sounds like if none of that 660 is in the fifth year and only the 150 coordinator is, that if you took 150 out of the fifth year projection, you could then compare that to 25, 26. And instead of being a 10% annual increase, it would be, I don't know what, 8% or some number.
Yes, I would agree with that. So,
So I guess then the question would be, since we have these assumptions that are kind of like 4 and 5% assumptions, that if I haven't done the math on that, but 150 out of something is going to be, that might lower it quite a bit, actually, huh?
yeah,
There's also a missing piece here is that, and we talked about this yesterday, is that we may want to account for special projects like Mallard Points, either on its own line or on a subline in some way, because you've got, which I think is high, by the way, through that 5 years, 150 for each of those 5 years, but nonetheless, you've got that in there rolling over those years, but we don't have a equivalent revenue structure attached to that
right.
at all. We have, I think, $100,000 over a 18-month period. And their fees, arguably with it, road impact fees and everything else, is upwards of $1 million. So we've been hesitant to plan for or project permit revenues without the permit in hand. I think we only have the 100,000 that Rebecca feels comfortable with to Helga, which is the current demolition, site work, and city map, potentially the building permit on the first phase one. But we've got the cost associated with it throughout the whole plan at full implementation. So that's a miss, I think, a little bit. We might want to create a special project / Mallard module that looks at both sides of it and layers onto it, because I think David's right. It's skewing those numbers artificially. And the general plan will do that anyway, but you add on top those contractor costs for a special project like Mallard, it's going to skew it even more so than it would otherwise do so.
Yeah, that's important, and thanks for covering that. I wasn't really looking at the revenue. I was just kind of assuming that there's revenue generated off the project, of course, and that somewhere in our excellent team and review that those revenues were being matched with the coordinator and other costs. And so I was just trying to take and remove the whole bump. And so you said you'd tend to agree that if I took year 5 and pulled out 150,000, I could then compare that. And I just did that. And it reduces the 5-year increase in planning and building from 59% to 47%. So it is close to that 8%. Maybe it'd be 8.25%. So I guess then my question would be, why is planning and building going up 8.25% per year when our underlying benefit assumptions and so forth are, costs or COLAs are in the 4 to 5%? Does that make sense?
Well, so in the outer years, we budgeted for 3% COLAs,
Right.
and then we budgeted for expenditures to increase by 5%.
So both those numbers are materially below the 8%. I'm just taking year 5 planning and building, which is 2.11, and I'm taking 150,000 out of that, which gets you to 19, whatever it was, and dividing that by the expected current actual for 25, 26, which is 1.33, and the difference is 47%.
1.3, it's 1.777. For 26, 27, or 25, 26?
25, 26. I'm taking actual, what we're doing today, and comparing it to what we're projecting 5 years.
Do you think rather than doing this on the fly, would it be better for Helga to come back and do that analysis? And
I
send
guess
it
I
back?
didn't write my email very well, and I sent it just yesterday. So I'm perfectly fine with that. It's just,
Yeah.
I don't know, that's fine.
I think there's a lot going
Well,
on in that planning line.
there is a
From general
lot.
plan to things like that. And maybe you got to pull it out so you can see what a normal business as usual flow would look like, to David's point, and because that should replicate more of an 8%.
Well,
If it is, or identify why it's at 8% and everything else would be lower than that.
well,
And it might be that it's appropriate. It probably
Yeah.
could be. I can't reconcile it in my mind.
and those projected years take into account the change in compensation based on the comp study and the 2.5. And so that's then multiplied by the 3% each of the year 2 through 5 for salaries and benefits. So-
Then
So
that's,
so it's 5 plus 3 over 5 years every year. So it's cumulative 8,
Right.
which makes sense to be somewhere in the 40%.
Right.
right. So when we look at the exhibit that shows, I forget where it is, that shows the assumed increases, the COLA stuff. Where is that? Is that in your memo? Thought it was. It is, it's in the,
Table 6 in the memo.
yeah, I was looking at table 13 on page 12. Expenditure assumptions,
Right. So the,
because that actually leads to my other question that was in the email. So when we say salaries, 3,333,
that's cumulative. So, it takes 26, 27's proposed budget salary and then multiplies that by 3%. And then
Yeah.
that new number is multiplied
yeah,
by 3%.
I understand that. The 8% is the same way, 8% each year cumulative. So that's highlighting my question, the 3% there. And obviously you've got fringe benefits at 4%, other costs at 5%, but none of those approach 8. So it sounds like there's a study that is, the compensation is actually going to go up more than 3%. Is that what's happening? Okay, so enlighten me, please.
Yeah, I can comment on that. So we have a compensation study, which was kind of linked to a classification study as well. What are
Right.
people doing here? How does that compare to other agencies? And, is it fair to pay them? What is a fair salary in terms of the median market or slightly below the median market for
Right.
Marin County and a couple of these surrounding agencies? And that work is still ongoing. We're still in the middle of negotiations and closed sessions with council. So I can't, talk perfectly openly about that right now, but yeah, for Helga's purposes and what we've included in the budget is a 3% COLA on top of whatever is negotiated, and the amount that we've contemplated for it, just we can call it the true up, whatever you want to call it, to reach to the market goal that we're trying to get to. That number is
124,000,
in total per year.
the compensation.
It's
To bring
about,
every-
it's about,
So is that
it's about 5%.
It's about 5%.
Yeah.
As a one-time.
Yes.
And that's for non-bargaining,
It's
Staff.
for all stuff.
including the bargaining units?
Yes.
Because you'd only change them, or you'd change the bargaining compensation outside of a collective bargaining agreement?
Well,
It comes
the
out.
contracts ended will end June 30th, 2026, our current contracts, and that's why we're in negotiation with both the represented and non-represented staff.
Well, that gets us closer. I don't think it closes the gap.
Well, and
So,
it- and
to
then-
the 8%.
Right.
I mean, it would close it for the first year. 5 + 3 is 8, but I know you've got pension at 4 and other at 5. So there's still a little bit, not as big as originally because of two things. One, I didn't understand that 150 was in year 5, so that lowers it from 10 to 8. And then this one-time potential 5 could be 4, could be 6. Who knows where it's spread across, but that closes it further. So we're getting closer. I'm satisfied for the purposes of today's meeting. And maybe you can just dig that and we'll close that remaining gap.
Sure, we can do that.
There were two reasons I was looking at this. One was just as a general look at what we're projecting for expenditures and is that, within these numbers and so forth. And the other was to see that you already mentioned, I think, Robert, that, or maybe it was Helga, that there wasn't going to be additional personnel hired by the city on an inside staffing basis for Mallard Point. But I wanted to sort of just ferret out that when that ship goes over the horizon, we're back and it doesn't leave any embedded costs that sort of just perpetuate.
And, the other thing that's in there is that department's portion of the UAL, which increased
Yeah.
for next year. So that's also in that line item. as
So
well.
that was a question I had in the email too, because it's again, that same chart on table 13, where you've got the UAL in the next 2 fiscal years at 18 and 15%. And then it goes negative. And I apologize if I researched this, I could probably answer the question myself, but it's easier to ask you. Are those numbers pulled out of numbers from CalPERS?
Those numbers come from the June 30th, 2024 evaluation report, and it's their projections for the UAL for both the safety and miscellaneous.
Perfect.
So-
I thought so. And
And as you know, that will shift dramatically when we get the budget next year.
Yeah.
because-
as always.
David, you might want to, when you get a sec, you're looking at the 5-year projection, but look at 25, 26, 26, 27.
Right.
That's the biggest jump. That's basically, it bumps up. There's a 20% bump in operating costs. And then that flows a little more flatly over that 5-year period of time.
Well, I suspect that the 26, 27 is what includes that 5%.
That's
That's
Yeah.
correct.
that's the big
Yeah.
jump right there.
Thank you. So that answers several of them. The other couple of questions, one on this 660,000. When is that expected to be an expense?
So I started budgeting for it in 27, 28.
Okay,
So, and then like I said, allocated it over the following 3 fiscal years. The general plan update.
I mean, during our annual retreat, we had a pretty long conversation about the general plan update and what that might look like and whether we needed a full plan update and whether we just wanted to keep this as a live document that we just update over time rather than just these very expensive concrete updates every 20 years. And so I believe, Peter, you and Kevin are working on that right now to see whether we can essentially do a lot of it in-house to get those costs down.
Yeah, we're trying to, as Sally talked about, in a sense, take off the 2030 designation. I mean, that's the simple way of describing it, but having it being just a general plan for the city that gets updated from time to time with state mandated update requirements as well as timeliness updates based on community changes, housing requirement changes, and so forth. So we're in the process right now of going through identifying sort of in a matrix format, what are the mandated updates we need to do, so we can break down what are perhaps a more administrative, straightforward changes we can make. Trying to avoid what we're budgeting for here, which is in Kevin's words, a boiling the water type of all hands on deck general plan rewrite, which would probably cost more than that over the long term, having recently completed our housing element, which is only one part of that broader plan. So we are looking at it as a incremental update process and tasking future councils with updating it as needed, as opposed to give it a termination date as it currently has right now, which will probably have positive benefits for that number, but I think it's wise to keep that number in there for that period of time.
Thank you. That helps a lot. And obviously we'll hear more about that when it gets to the current year budget.
Right. And we should know more probably by next year, I would think.
Yeah.
So.
I think the last question I had in that email was on the climate action plan. And I know I'd written this before John's email came out. And I noted he mentioned a number of different sort of studies, and you can study a lot of things. And I had just identified the client action plan because I didn't know what it was. It was budgeted last year for 25,000. I guess and nothing took place then, and now it's budgeted for 50,000. And so I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but then you'll probably speak to some of John's questions later. But what is the climate action plan? Is it required? And is it going to be $50,000 and then we're done with it for some period of time?
Yeah, so the climate action plan is a part of the city's general plan, and it has to be updated from time to time. There's specific state laws that have been enacted recently that require you to meet certain greenhouse gas emission goals by, again, I think it's 2030. And to get there, the climate action plan is really a roadmap of how the city can do that. And just like the housing element, there's a ton of policies and programs that have been contemplated in the plan that need to be implemented. So there's an opportunity. Tiburon hired somebody on they're sharing the cost with Mill Valley for a full-time position. We chose not to participate in that just because we didn't feel like it was needed here. But we do think for a small effort, roughly $25,000 to $50,000, we can have a consultant do the lion's share of that work for us and put those programs in place so that we meet the requirements, and we don't have an out of compliant or an action plan that has, no action on it. So we're trying to get there.
So thank you. So is it primarily around emissions?
Yeah.
So like our power plant and all those kinds of things we have?
And efficiency, renewable sources,
But David, I agree with, so the last climate action plan we did was done by Nancy Kemnitzer for free. So I was surprised by that number as well. I don't think that we'll necessarily need that number, but things are potentially getting a little bit more complicated just because the way that we measure emissions in California is moving from an annual measure to an hourly measure.
Right.
Because we're all contracting with MCE, which is very clean on an annual basis, but not an hourly basis. Things might change for cities as well in terms of having to do other stuff.
Yeah.
Because we always relied on them. But as I say, Nancy had put together a working group last time and they did that, I think, with no expense.
Right.
And so I think we should aim to do something similar next time because that feels like a big number.
And to be clear, I'm all for climate action. Just not so much for spending money and maybe we should do an EIR on the impact of doing a climate action plan. But
I thought the 50 and the 150 for the housing element implementation were on implementation, not so much reworking the plans themselves.
Yeah, that's right. The plan, I'm sure that as part of this evaluation and implementation, there may be some parts of the plan that need to be adapted and updated. But for the most part, we're talking about implementation. Yeah.
Thank you.
How do you implement a climate action plan?
Well, like I said, just like the housing element, there's 15 or 20 different programs you have to put in place.
I mean, Tony talked about a couple of them at the retreat, putting in high efficiency lighting around the city for 80 grand, you know, doing more efficient, you know, charging systems, you know, having more charging systems, things along those lines, which are ways for the city to overall lower its greenhouse gas emissions. You know, I think they all need to be evaluated, like we talked about in the meeting, on a value basis, not just for the sake of doing it. The housing element stuff is a little bit more straightforward. You know, you have specific programs for specific policies that you have to implement. Again, I don't think we're going to spend anywhere near that money, but you have to be deliberate. HCD and whatever state agency is looking at the climate action plans, they do watch your efforts from an implementation perspective. So we certainly are going forward with that. Certainly with our housing updates, we're reporting our housing updates and pivoting and showing them as results of the plans and the policies that we put in place.
Okay, Helga, what I think we're going to do with respect to John Wilton's questions, which we all got, why don't I just take them one at a time and ask you and let you respond to them?
Okay.
His overall concern was with the growth in expenditures. He then had 6 bullet points of specific items that hopefully you can respond to today, Helga.
Sure.
The first was that he questioned why does the city budget staff costs at the top of the salary range for each position when we know what our actual staff costs are?
So we budget that way because part of it is that it's past practice, and the other part is that all but 3 of our staff are at the top step of the salary range. So it makes sense to budget for them, and it accounts for any increases during the fiscal year due to merit increases. So.
Okay, second question is the $235,000 the annual cost of employing a temporary police officer? And do we need 30,000 study to evaluate police department staffing?
The 235 is the salary and benefits for a police officer, and it reflects we budget for the benefits, the health insurance benefits at the family rate, because we don't know if the person's single, but that way we have it budgeted for the higher rate. And also the PD has additional pays, like I mentioned in the PowerPoint, for education incentives, shift differential, and like holiday pay that is on top of their base pay, so that other positions don't have. So. Oh, and the 30,000 police study, I'll let Robert answer that.
So the 30,000, and again, I don't think we will be spending that amount, but it is earmarked for a study to look into what would ideally, what are the options for the city when it comes to policing in Belvedere? Just internally with our own department, do we have the best structure right now in terms of a chief and sergeants and officers, and how many officers is appropriate given the size of our city? Some of that work we can do ourselves, but it would be great to have an outside opinion who, is not just focused in Marin County, but sees a broader picture of here's traditional policing and here's how you can envision that. So that's kind of part one. Part two is a more broad view, looking at what would policing on the peninsula look like if we had more of a combined department, or perhaps even the JPA or something like that, similar to how the Tiburon Fire Protection District operates. And that's a bigger analysis, and I think a lion's share of the cost is probably seated in that versus the first part I mentioned. And Peter or Sally, if you want to add to that, feel free.
Yeah, part of our work the last couple of years with our police chief has been focusing on the resiliency and the redundancy within the department, making sure that they have the depth and the opportunity to actually service the community, and the 24/7 means that they are asked to do so. Policing is more challenging in other positions relative to outages, time off, disability training. So this was an interim step for I think 2 or 3 year bubble
3
to
years.
bring back the additional officer so that they can meet the needs of the community from a redundancy and from a resilience perspective without relying on an outside agency, which has been considered and found lacking in many degrees at this point in time. While we, as Robert talked about, think about the department from a longer term perspective, a succession planning perspective, and reimagining it from the sense of, do we continue with the same model that we've had in the past, a chief and sergeants and officers, as Robert said, or do we think about it differently? Maybe think about it as a captaincy, as the top person here reporting to a chief in another jurisdiction, or even have the city manager act as a chief responsibilities in some fashion, as a way to get more of an operational department, as a possibility potential, but looking for an outside source to validate that to some degree, because what we're relying on now, as expertise as our police department is, they have expertise in Belvedere policing, and we want to look at it from a little bit more from an outside perspective as well. And like Robert said, we're not looking at spending a ton of money there, but looking at some objective check on how we're planning our staffing going forward.
I think what Peter isn't saying out loud there is that we don't have a working chief. And so part of that examination is, can we, with a different model, have only 6 headcount rather than 7?
And to clarify, working chief, meaning his function here is primarily administrative, 99% of that. He will fill in for shifts as needed, but again, is that the best model for us? As Peter said, we start looking at succession planning.
Okay, John's next question was ditto on the 150,000 for a consultant on housing element goals and 15,000 for fire annexation study.
So our housing element was certified this past February. And so staff are working on organizing the programs, which will need consultant support. Not all of the policies and programs will need that. Some will be done in-house. So like Peter and Robert have said, maybe not all the 150,000 will be needed, but it's just kind of earmarked for that. And it's just the implementation of the certified housing element. So. And then the 15,000 for the fire annexation study is for ongoing costs related to the evaluation of the city's options for either fire annexation into the fire district or a revised contract. So.
Can I add just one thing there, just in terms of why sometimes money is well spent, which is that one of the things that we have discovered through these discussions with the fire district is that the GAN limit override vote that we've been taking to the voters every 4 years, we will not need in the future. And so that saves money there.
His next question maybe was covered by David's comment of 50,000 for climate action plan.
And so that's the implementation, as we spoke about the climate action plan.
Okay. His next bullet point was questioning the 100,000 for the insurance legal fund.
So this is just the transfer to the insurance legal fund. We're estimating to spend 200,000 in ongoing uninsured legal expenses next year, but we're only planning to transfer 100,000, and that will bring the balance in that insurance and legal reserve fund to 250,000, which is the minimum required balance per the policy, instead of keeping it at the 350,000.
And then John, the last point says that he doesn't understand why pension costs increase so much, 24%, including health insurance each year. even though we create an additional fund to meet our unfunded liabilities over time.
That's the UAL. Yes, you have your normal cost rate and then you have your required UAL payment, and that depends on market performance. Simple as that. And so the year that the contribution relates to was a year which was a bad year for financial markets because it was 2023, 2020.
2022 and 2023.
Yeah.
So,
So the numbers will shift again, but for this year, that's what's causing that jump along with more employees, presumably, in terms of the normal cost rate.
yes, the normal cost rate does reflect the addition of the 1.5 police officer positions, so. And then it is determined by CalPERS, the amount we pay each month, so.
Yeah. Okay, I think that covered the item that John had. Questions, other questions from committee members? Comments?
I have one question actually, Helga. You just said that you're anticipating spending 200,000 on legal and insurance claims in 27. That seems quite a high number given that our CTL problems are somewhat behind us. What other risks are you anticipating there?
There's also a human resource related issue that we're working on.
That
And
will continue into 27.
we anticipate it, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other comments from the committee, are there any members of the public on Zoom? All right. If there are no other questions or comments, I assume we should entertain a motion to recommend the preliminary operating capital budget to the city council. Is that correct, Helga?
That's correct.
Can I get such a motion and a second?
So moved.
Is there a second?
You can say it.
Well, I can if you want to. All right, I second. Roll call.
Chair McCaskill,
Yes.
Patrick Fader,
Yes.
and David Walker.
Aye.
That passes unanimously.
Thank you, Helga. The last item on the agenda for our meeting today is a discussion and possible action establishing an ad hoc pension review committee.
Thank you, Chair. The Finance Committee last conducted a pension funding review in December of 2023, consistent with the city's policy to review the strategy at least every 5 years, and based on council direction from the retreat, we plan to bring an update to council in December of 2026. To support that effort, we are recommending the committee establish an ad hoc pension funding committee today to begin reviewing pensions this fall, once the latest CalPERS valuation report is released later in August.
Shall I provide a bit more context as well? So at the annual retreat, there were some questions from another council member about the merits of transferring some of the 115 and paying off some of the CalPERS UAL. And so that combined with that request, we're 3 years since the last assessment. So it felt like it would be a good time to do that now so that we can report back to the council what the recommendations are, both in relation to whether the 300,000 is still appropriate and whether the pros and cons of pulling money out of the 115 and putting it into CalPERS. Because obviously CalPERS on a long-term basis outperforms because it takes more risk, but obviously you've already talked about the benefits of keeping money in a 115.
And is the proposal that this would be a committee created by this finance committee or by the city council?
By this Finance
By
Committee.
this, okay, so meaning we would appoint members,
Yes.
and are there any recommendations, Sally?
David's looking in the wrong direction. David and I worked on this last time, and I think Will might be interested in participating as well. So if you're up for it.
I would.
I'm fine, yes.
And how many, just the two of you? I'm sorry, who was it?
So Will,
Oh,
David,
Will,
and
yeah,
myself.
sorry. Yep. Okay, do we need a motion for that?
Not today.
Okay, all right, so I will assume the committee is in agreement with that, hearing no objections. And at that point, is there any other new business to be brought before us today?
I do have one item.
Okay,
So I wanted to bring to the committee's attention a new requirement under Senate Bill 852 that was signed into law in October of 2025, that beginning in 2026, public officials who manage public investments, including certain board, commissions, and committee members, will be required to electronically file a Form 700 Statement of Economic Interest with the FPPC. This form will be due annually by April 1st. This change to the Finance Committee. So this does affect the Finance Committee members since they have input into the investments. And so this change was presented to the City Council at its April 13th meeting, amending the Administrative Policy Manual, Section 6 on committees, commissions, and boards to reflect this change in state law. And our city clerk will be reaching out to the members of the committee with additional information on filing the Form 700.
and for this committee, the first form will have to be filed by next April 1st, or?
No, she'll be sending out the information in the next week or two. And so you need to file it as soon as possible.
Got it. Okay, any questions on that?
Yeah, I have a question. So this is a state requirement,
Yes.
and correct me if I'm wrong, but this committee makes recommendations and doesn't actually take those actions. It makes recommendations to the city council that then takes the action. So I would think we're studying things, but we're not taking the actions to manage them. Has that aspect been addressed?
It was the recommendation of our city attorney based on the new law, because the new law states that management of public investments means the non-ministerial functions of directing the investment of public monies, formulating or approving investment policies, approving or establishing guidelines for asset allocation, or approving investment transactions.
So I don't think we do any of that.
You
I mean,
advise.
non-ministerial means fiduciary or discretionary. And I heard in that it says taking actions, and we can't do that.
My understanding of the law from talking with the city attorney on this is that it's any group who makes or participates in making governmental decisions. So in this case, we're developing a recommendation, even though the action is done by city council. You're providing insight into policy, which then is a recommendation. So err on the side of caution, I guess, is what our
I got that.
city attorney said about filing.
I guess it begs the question, how difficult is the form? We're all each asked to
Takes
fill
about
out
10
a
seconds.
10-page financial statement. Maybe we would like our city attorney to reconsider.
It's not your economic interest, it's your economic interest in things that might conflict with your activities. Correct?
Right.
It's not your entire.
So
economic
filling
interest.
out the form should be fairly easy.
You have to do it online and it takes literally 2 minutes.
Okay,
As long as you read it correctly. Do you have a different, you've looked at the statement?
I haven't looked at anything. This is the first I've heard of it, and that's why I'm asking the question. Do you want to just send me the link for that information, or?
well,
I guess I can wait until the clerk, and then I'll raise questions at that point, if I have any.
Right. And she'll be sending that out. So.
okay. All right.
One of the things that came up in relation to looking at this policy for the Finance Committee was that our charter says that the chair of the Finance Committee should be 3 years. We've actually reduced it to 2 at the council meeting, correct? Because to make it more consistent with other committees. And so and also to introduce a vice chair, which we should have been doing and we haven't been doing. So at the November meeting, we were hoping to do a rotation of those two positions.
Great.
Been waiting for that for years.
Yes. Okay, there's no other new business.
That's all I had.
Okay, I believe we're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Particularly, thank you, Helga.
Yes,
Thank
thank you,
you.
Helga.
Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.